Have you ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why you went in there? Most people laugh it off, but some people feel a flicker of something else, a half second of genuine fear, a quiet voice asking whether that moment meant something more than just a busy week. If that has ever happened to you, or if you've watched it happen to someone you love, stay with me. Because the honest answer is that most of the time, it means nothing at all. But there are 6 early signs of dementia that, when they start clustering together, genuinely deserve your attention. And these are exactly the 6 signs that families spend years quietly explaining away before anyone takes them seriously. My name is Dr. Miles, 13 years in emergency medicine. And I have sat across from more families in that exact moment of dawning recognition than I can count the moment where 6 small things they'd each dismissed on their own suddenly line up into a pattern they can't unsee. Here's what I want to do with you today. First, a simple picture of what's actually happening inside the brain when dementia begins. Because once you understand that, the 6 signs stop sounding like a random checklist and start making sense as one continuous story. Then I'll walk you through those 6 signs roughly in the order they tend to appear. And then I'll tell you exactly what to do, what to say, who to call, and how to do it without terrifying the person you're worried about. Because there is more that can be done today than at almost any point before now. The library that's losing its catalog. Think of your brain as a vast library. Not just shelves of books, a living library, where librarians constantly walk the aisles, filing new books the moment they arrive, and pulling old ones the second you ask for them. Every memory, every habit, every name, your sense of where you are and what day it is that's a book in this library. And the whole system only works because the cataloging never stops. In Alzheimer's disease, the most common cause of dementia, 2 specific kinds of damage spread through this library. A sticky protein called amyloid builds up between the shelves like clutter in the aisles, blocking the librarians from moving freely. A tangled protein called tau builds up inside the shelving itself until entire sections physically collapse. The aisles get harder to walk, the shelves start coming down. Section by section, the library stops functioning the way it used to. Here's the part that genuinely surprised me when I first learned it properly. This doesn't begin in someone's 70s. It begins 15 to 20 years before a single symptom shows up. We can see amyloid building on brain scans of people in their 40s and 50s who will go on to develop Alzheimer's decades later. The shelves are already cluttering long before anyone notices a single book out of place. That's why the early signs are so quiet, and it's why catching them early matters as much as it does every year you intervene. Is a year the disease has less library left to take. Sign number 1, the same question asked, like it's new. The first sign is short-term memory. Specifically, the particular way it starts to fail. This is the one everyone thinks they understand, and the one that gets waved away most, because everybody forgets things sometimes. But the version that matters is forgetting the same thing, in the same conversation, more than once. Someone asks what time the appointment is, and 20 minutes later asks again, not as a follow-up, but as if the first question never happened. They fill the kettle, forget it, find it cold an hour later, and fill it again. Here's why. One of the very first parts of the brain Alzheimer's damages is the hippocampus in our library, the librarian on duty, who catalogs anything new. If that librarian goes off shift, new books still arrive at the front desk. They just never get filed. This is why someone in the early stages can describe their wedding day from 40 years ago in extraordinary detail, but can't tell you what they had for breakfast 2 hours ago. The old books were cataloged by a librarian who was still doing the job perfectly. The new ones never make it onto a shelf at all. I had a patient whose daughter brought her in after a minor fall. While I took the history, she told me, unprompted, the exact date and venue of her sister's wedding in 1962, down to the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. 90 seconds later, she asked me whether I'd met her sister, no memory of having just told me. That gap, vivid, distant memory sitting next to a completely empty recent one, is one of the most specific things I look for, because it doesn't happen with ordinary tiredness. It happens when the cataloging has stopped. Sign number 2, when the hands forget what the mind once knew. The second sign shows up in tasks that used to run on autopilot and suddenly don't. Someone who has cooked the same recipe for 30 years struggles halfway through it. Someone who has managed the household accounts every month without fail starts missing payments they've never missed before. These automatic tasks don't live in the same part of the brain as conscious thinking. Think of them like a pianist's hands, finding a familiar chord without the eyes ever needing to check the keys, built entirely on repetition, with no conscious thought required. When dementia damages the cortex, the outer layer of the brain, that muscle memory starts to falter. The hands hesitate over the keys they used to find without looking. I had a man in his 70s, brought in by his son after the family discovered 3 months of unpaid utility bills, the first missed payments in the 40 years he'd run that household's finances. What struck me wasn't the missed bills themselves. It was that he genuinely couldn't explain why he'd stopped, because from the inside, nothing felt different to him. The skill had quietly left the room before he noticed the door closing. Sign number 3. The person changes before the memory does. The third sign isn't about memory or tasks. It's personality, and it's missed most often because it doesn't look like what people picture when they imagine dementia. A naturally outgoing person goes quiet at family gatherings, and everyone assumes it's their hearing. A gentle person becomes irritable in moments that never used to bother them. None of this arrives suddenly. It accumulates so slowly that families describe it as, they're just a bit different now, and file it under getting older. Imagine a photograph left in sunlight for years. Nobody watches it fade in real time. You only notice one day, holding it up next to an older copy, that the colors have quietly drained out of it while you weren't looking. Personality change in early dementia works the same way. There's rarely a moment you can point to, only a slow loss of saturation that families almost always only recognize in hindsight. There's a growing body of research now into mild behavioral impairment, a genuine, lasting shift in mood or behavior later in life that, in some people, turns out to be one of the earliest footprints the disease leaves, arriving before the more obvious cognitive signs do. I've had more than one family tell me, almost as a confession, that they noticed the personality change years before anything else, but assumed it was grief or retirement, because nobody tells you that personality can be one of the earliest doors dementia walks through. I had a daughter once describe her father's withdrawal as, he just stopped being loud, and that detail has stayed with me longer than most clinical findings do. Sign number 4. Losing the route you've walked 1,000 times. The fourth sign is direction, specifically losing it somewhere that should be impossible to get lost. In its more advanced form, this can mean someone wandering from home with no memory of how they got there, a genuine medical emergency, not just a sign to file away. But early on, it's far subtler. Hesitating at a junction driven through for 15 years. Taking a wrong turn toward a friend's house visited every month for a decade. The part of the brain responsible for spatial navigation sits right next to the hippocampus from sign 1. And it's one of the very first areas Alzheimer's damages, sometimes before memory loss, is obvious at all. Think of it as the compass bolted to the inside of the library, the part that knows which floor you're on and which way the exit is, completely separate from the part that remembers what's on the shelves. You can still remember the book you came in for and lose the ability to find your way back to the door. I once had a retired postman in my department, brought in by a neighbor after he was found 2 streets from his own house, certain he was lost on a route he'd walked daily for 30 years delivering mail. He wasn't confused about anything else that day. He couldn't get on his bloods fast enough for me, and everything came back normal. It was the navigation alone that had failed weeks before any memory complaint ever surfaced. If walking through the actual mechanics of this, rather than just handing you a list to be frightened by, is the kind of thing you want more of, this is genuinely the whole channel. Subscribing means the next one of these reaches you. 2 signs left, and they're the 2 I think matter most. Sign number 5, the word that won't come. The 5th sign is language, and the growing struggle to land on exactly the right word. This needs careful handling, because it happens to almost everyone occasionally. I can feel myself reaching for words a little more than usual after an hour of filming this. What's different in early dementia is the frequency and the kind of word lost. A watch becomes the thing on your wrist. A kettle becomes the thing you boil. The names of grandchildren start slipping out of reach. The language centers sit in 2 areas. On one side of the brain, Broca's area and Wernicke's area, the same regions you'd recognize from stroke physiology. Think of it like reaching into a drawer you've opened 1,000 times. Except now, half the labels have been swapped or removed, so your hand finds the right shape, but can't read what it's holding. The word is still in there. It just can't be located fast enough anymore. A study published in 2021 looked at short writing samples from people who were still completely healthy and found that subtle shifts in word choice could predict a future Alzheimer's diagnosis more than 7 years before symptoms were obvious to anyone around them. The brain was already working harder to do something that used to cost it nothing. I had a retired school teacher describe her own symptoms to me better than most textbooks do. She said it felt like talking through a thick fog where I can see the shape of the word but not its edges. I've used that description with other patients ever since, because nobody has ever put it more precisely than she did. Sign number 6, when judgment quietly gives way. And now the 6th sign, which I take most seriously of all, because it's the one that tends to bring real consequences. This is a decision completely out of character, carrying genuine risk, sending money to a stranger who called with a convincing story, leaving the cooker on and walking away. I see the medication version of this constantly. A patient comes in confused, and when we check their dosette box, we find the morning, afternoon, and evening doses, all taken within the same hour, with no memory of having taken either of the first two. We run their bloods, observe them for a few hours, and most of the time, they're fine. But it happens far more often than people realize, and it's rarely the first sign anyone noticed. It's usually just the first one that brought them through my doors. The part of the brain responsible is the prefrontal cortex, right at the front of the skull, the part that plans, weighs consequences, and holds back impulses before they become actions. Think of it as the librarian's supervisor, the one whose job is to stop a member walking out the front door with an armful of books they haven't checked out. When that supervisor stops showing up, nothing dramatic happens at first. People just start walking out with things they shouldn't, and nobody stops them, because the part of the system built to say no has quietly gone missing. Older adults in the earliest stages of decline are measurably more vulnerable to financial scams, and an unexplained loss of money in the years before a diagnosis is one of the strongest warning signs we know of in some research, stronger than several of the signs that came before it on this list. What this doesn't mean and what to actually do. If you recognize one or two of these signs in yourself or someone you love, hear this clearly. That does not mean dementia. There's a long list of other things that produce exactly these symptoms: poor sleep, depression, anxiety, an underactive thyroid, vitamin B12 deficiency, the side effects of a new medication. A proper assessment by a doctor works through every one of these before the word dementia is used. Seriously, a thorough history, a full examination, a real set of blood tests, an honest conversation about mood and recent stress at home. This should never start with being sent straight to a memory clinic before any of that groundwork is done. So here's what to actually do. If you're worried about yourself, write down the specific things you've noticed as precisely as you can and bring a family member to the appointment. What they've observed from the outside is often more revealing than anything you can describe about yourself. If you're worried about someone you love, the kindest thing you can do is have a calm conversation with them, away from a moment of stress, and offer to go with them. People in this position often resist out of fear more than denial. So don't lead with the word dementia. Lead with this instead. I've noticed a few things, and I'd feel better if we just got it checked to rule something serious out. That sentence does the same job without triggering the fear that makes people dig in and refuse to go. There's genuinely more that can be done today than even 5 years ago. How someone eats, moves, sleeps, and manages their blood pressure can measurably slow this process down, and in the earliest stages can actually improve how the brain is functioning right now. That evidence is real enough that it deserves its own video, properly, rather than a rushed final paragraph here. If you've stayed this long, you've already shown me you're someone who'd rather understand a thing fully than be handed a quick answer and move on, and that's exactly who I'm making this channel for. If you want the lifestyle video when it's ready, subscribing is the only way I can put it directly in front of you. Tell me in the comments, and I'll know what to make next. None of the 6 things I've described today, on their own, mean anything is wrong. But if a few start clustering together quietly over months rather than days, that is your cue. Not to panic, just to have one calm conversation with a doctor. The truth about this disease is that it never announces itself on the day it arrives. It moves in 15 years before anyone notices, one forgotten kettle, one missed turn, one quiet evening at a party, at a time. The people who catch it earliest are rarely the ones who panic the loudest. They are the ones who were paying attention long before there was anything obvious to pay attention to, and who, when the small things finally lined up, already knew exactly what to do with what they were seeing. I'm Dr. Miles. I'll see you in the next one.